To better your best and your world, you need to dig deep and grow. Join us as top experts, leaders, and creators uncover powerful insights to help you grow in life and in work. And now, your host, Michael McAvoy. Hello, everybody. This is Michael McAvoy. I'm your host today, and we're with Dig Deep Grow, the show dedicated to helping you better your best and your world. Today, we're going to be talking about, well, let's do a little quiz here. The most popular drug in America is a white powder. Guess what it is? I'm sure most of you are probably saying, well, that's cocaine. No, but this one is legal, and it's largely unregulated, and it's addictive. The answer is caffeine. And we're going to be talking with Murray Carpenter about the good, the bad, the ugly, some of the things that industry does in an unregulated world with caffeine. Learn such things as how it can reinforce our buying patterns and affect health problems like obesity and anxiety. So, Murray, thanks for joining me today.
Oh, well, thanks for having me on.
Fantastic. So, Murray, let me first ask, what was the impetus for writing the book? What was how did you get started on the path to write this book?
Well, it was a long journey. I often hear authors who say that they just suddenly realized they had to write a book when they saw something happen or something just triggered their interest. For me, this book was just aimed for 30 years since I was an undergraduate studying psychology at the University of Colorado.
Okay.
And back then, I was just starting to drink coffee, and I became very intrigued by how it affected my moods and my alertness, and so I wrote a paper senior year about it, and ever since then, I've been interested in caffeine.
Yeah, we're going to get into some of the research that you've been able to uncover with your book. But first, give an overview of exactly how widespread the usage is of caffeine in its various forms.
Well, it's incredibly popular. In the U.S., most people, probably over 80% of Americans, use caffeine, some form of caffeine, daily. More than 60% of us consume caffeinated coffee daily. So that remains our biggest source of caffeine in the diet. And even children, about 75% of children and adolescents use caffeine daily. It's in smaller doses, but again, it's very, very popular throughout all sectors of society in America today.
Okay, so that's interesting. I'm going to ask you a little more about the youngsters using caffeine in a little bit. But the subtitle to your book is How Our Daily Habit Helps, Hurts, and Hooks Us. So I guess the first question that I'd like to ask is, what do you think is the biggest threat? Is there a health threat that you've discovered that caffeine it has on us? What's your thought there?
Yeah, well, let me break that down into basically 4 general areas of concern, and those are anxiety, sleeplessness or insomnia, pregnancy, and finally the possible link or the link between sugary soft drinks and obesity that caffeine can fuel. So those are sort of the big 4 issues.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and so the first one, I mean, anxiety, I think people tend to sort of be dismissive sometimes of anxiety, but it is something that afflicts many, many Americans. And for some people who are anxious, caffeine can either trigger anxiety or exaggerate their anxious symptoms. And even for people who suffer from panic disorder, people who experience panic attacks, a large dose of caffeine, about 400 milligrams, which would, it's a lot. It would be like a 20-ounce cup of Starbucks, but it's not, beyond what some people consume.
Mm-hmm.
That can reliably induce a panic attack in some people. So for people who suffer from anxiety, I would say it's really worth examining your caffeine use and either minimizing it or eliminating it for a while, just to see if it'll help with your symptoms.
Right, and just for our information, the typical 12 to 16 ounce cup of coffee, what is the amount of caffeine in that cup?
Yeah, I'm going to answer that. I'm going to give you a long-winded answer there, because this is one of the interesting things that I ran into about caffeine. The caffeine contents of coffee can vary dramatically, and to sort of underline this point, there was a researcher in Florida who went into the same Starbucks cafe and ordered the same 16-ounce coffee 6 days in a row. And the milligrams of caffeine in that ranged from 260 one day to 560 another. And so I guess on the low end, that would be about like 3 Red Bulls. On the high end, it would be about like 7 Red Bulls. So the caffeine contents in coffee can vary dramatically. However, I think it's safe to say, your typical 12-ounce cup of coffee would be like 150 to 240 milligrams of caffeine.
Okay, and for all the baristas out there, the at-home baristas, is there a way that they might be preparing their coffee, grinding it, or obviously the bean itself is going to determine a lot of what the caffeine content is, but in preparation, can you actually raise or lower the caffeine content by how you prepare a cup?
Yeah, great question. Yes, I mean, so one of the funny things is that dark roasted coffee actually has slightly less caffeine bean for bean than light roasted coffee, because some of the caffeine has basically been roasted out in the process. So if you prepare your coffee strong, I mean, which is to say the ratio of beans to water is higher, then obviously you're going to get more caffeine. And I guess you could say the sludgier, the more opaque your coffee, the more caffeine you're going to get. Espresso does have a lot of caffeine, but because it's typically consumed in smaller doses, it's not really what you might think of as super caffeinated, which is to say like a single espresso might have 75 milligrams of caffeine. So depending on how much you're consuming, it might not be as much as a regular cup of coffee. So yeah, I mean, I guess the big thing is the ratio of beans to water, and I would say along these lines, if you're trying to regulate your caffeine use through coffee, the best thing you can do is sort of standardize how you prepare your coffee. And again, the beans might vary, but at least you're minimizing some of the variables.
Yeah, I mean, I can tell you as a personal example, what I like to do is to get a dark roast coffee, and I'll grind it fine, in the finest that you can have, and just drip pour the water through it. So I always wondered, like, if you grind it fine versus keeping it a little more medium ground, any difference there?
That's a great question too, and a barista might be better suited to answer this. But if you might be getting more extraction from a very finely ground, coffee, a finely ground bean, which would allow you to either use slightly less coffee per cup, or maybe get a slightly stronger cup of coffee than with a more coarse grind. So, yeah, I mean that's going to be another thing that's going to factor in here.
All right, so that's the kind of interests category there. So let's dive in a little more to the health effects and societal impacts of caffeine. So you mentioned there were 4 areas. Anxiety was one that you touched on. Could you talk on the others?
Yeah. So I think we all know that caffeine can affect our sleep, and of course, this is what we love about it, is that it makes us feel less tired and more alert. But the acute way that it can affect your sleep is the thing that most of us have experienced when you've had a strong cup of coffee, say after dinner, and you're lying in bed trying to go to sleep, your heart's racing, you know, and your thoughts are racing, and you're thinking, oh man, I shouldn't have had that cup of coffee. So it can have that sort of obvious effect on some people. But it can have more subtle effects. So even a cup of coffee early in the day can affect the later period of your sleep the following night for most people. So again, the effects can be subtle, but since so many people suffer from insomnia, my suggestion is if you're one of those people and you use caffeine regularly, I would suggest, you know, reducing or eliminating caffeine for a while from your diet and seeing if it makes a difference. Again, it's not going to help everyone, but I would be surprised if it didn't help some people.
Right.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, you kind of put the description exactly on, you know, where I fall. I have a single, you know, 12 to 16 ounce cup of coffee in the morning. I'll fall asleep at night fine, but midway through the night I'll wake up. And you're saying there's a connection even though it's that far apart from when you consume it.
Yeah, I'm saying there might be. I mean, so it may be that if you stop drinking the coffee, you would still wake up at that period of the night, but it may be that you would sleep more soundly. And it's worth noting there really is a lot of genetic variation here. So there are some people, and I think we've all met them, who say, yeah, I can have a cup of coffee and go right to sleep and sleep like a baby. But that's not the case with most of us. Mm-hmm. So because we all metabolize caffeine differently, again, as with anxiety, I would say if you have trouble sleeping, I think you owe it to yourself to, you know, to stop for a while and just see if it helps. And if it doesn't, you know, go back to it. So that's thing two. The third concern of the health concern is pregnancy, and for a long time, doctors have suggested that women who were pregnant or hoping to become pregnant minimize or keep their caffeine use to about 200 milligrams a day, which would be, you know, like one strong cup of coffee, maybe a 10-ounce cup of coffee or something, maybe 12, or a few cups of tea. And more recently, there's been some research from Scandinavia that suggests that even at that level of caffeine consumption, there's some risk of having babies, not miscarriage, but babies who are low birth weight for their gestational age. So this is just one of those areas. I think it's pretty well known for people who are pregnant or expecting to become pregnant that they should keep their caffeine use to a minimum. And I think you know, more research is needed in this area, but I think it's one of those areas where it pays to be sort of cautious about caffeine.
Okay, and the last area is a big area. It talks about obesity, so why don't you address that?
Yeah, and so this is controversial, and you know, I'll mention this right up front. But so we have a huge problem with obesity in this country. We have a strong link. Researchers have showed a strong link between the consumption of sugary soft drinks and obesity. And most of the sugary soft drinks that we consume in the U.S., nearly all of them, are caffeinated. They're lightly caffeinated, but they're caffeinated nonetheless. So I think a lot of people who are, you know, drinking Coke or Pepsi or Dr. Pepper are really not aware of how much the caffeine in those products is driving their consumption of the soft drinks. And it's because the caffeine's there at low levels, but it's at levels, you know, that are significant in terms of they will still give you a little bit of a boost and still reinforce your buying patterns. So again, I would say if you're someone who has who struggles with obesity and consumes sugary soft drinks, it would be worth trying to substitute another sugar-free form of caffeine, you know, maybe brewed tea or something, and to see if that helps. So, you know, I think this is a very controversial area, but I think it's really worth paying attention to.
Would you say that the in a soft drink, is it the caffeine that is the addictive part? I mean, a lot of people say the sugar itself can be addictive. Now, I don't know if that's, you know, medically true, but I'll ask you if you have any information on that.
Yeah, well, so I'll I have to say, I look at the world through a caffeine-centric lens, right?
Okay.
But I do think so. I do think that the caffeine is the primary attraction to soft drinks. There are other things, the cool, effervescent liquid. I mean that's good. The sweetness is good. But if you look at the top 5 selling soft drinks in the U.S., some taste like cola, some taste like lemon lime, some taste like, Dr. Pepper, which is sort of its own flavor.
Mm-hmm.
And, some have sugar, but the number 2 selling soft drink in the U.S. has no sugar at all. It's Diet Coke. So, I think the sweetness is certainly attractive, but I really do think the caffeine is what keeps people coming back. I don't know how else you account for the fact that all of the top 5 soft drinks are caffeinated, and 8 of the top 10. I mean, it's the one common denominator in those drinks besides carbonated water. So, I do think the caffeine is probably the strongest factor that keeps drawing people back to soft drinks.
Okay. Now, if my memory serves me well, in the case of Coke or Coke type products, the source, the coca bean, does have caffeine in it, correct?
Yeah. So the original formula had coca, the leaf from South America, which had cocaine in it.
Uh-huh.
But the cocaine was they took the cocaine out, stopped using cocaine more than 100 years ago. Then the cola nut, which was part of the original formula, is a naturally caffeinated plant product from Africa. And so that's where some of the caffeine originally derived from. But for more than 100 years, the caffeine in Coca-Cola has been extracted from either tea or coffee, or now it's naturally synthesized, or rather pharmaceutically synthesized, and blended into those products, blended into the Coca-Cola. And the caffeine has nothing to do with either the Coca or the cola in the formula.
Right. Yeah. So I guess the interesting thing that I see in that is that you mentioned that many soft drinks have it, not ones that traditionally had it in it naturally. So a lemon lime soda, for instance,
Right.
It has caffeine in it, yet it has no natural reason to have it in there.
Exactly. Yeah. And or Sunkist is another example. Yeah. So right, there's this long history of putting caffeine into products, and yes, I think you could trace the ancient roots to naturally occurring caffeinated compounds that we use for flavoring and stimulants. But for more than 100 years, it's just been blended into soft drinks as a powder.
Okay. So now, so we have the backdrop there. There, in the case of soft drinks, would you say the majority of them have some sort of stimulant like caffeine in it?
Yeah. Well, the majority of them have caffeine. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, if you go down the line of the top soft drinks, Coke, Diet Coke, Pepsi, Mountain Dew, Dr. Pepper, and then the various diet permutations of those products as well. Yeah, they all have caffeine.
Okay. So along those lines, I want you to address the issue of major brands and manipulation. I guess I don't know how to say it, but they've been ducking regulatory efforts for many years. Talk a little about the backstory there.
Well, this is a story that really started more than 100 years ago. There was a very colorful leader of the agency that would become the Food and Drug Administration. It was then called the Bureau of Chemistry, and his name was Harvey Wiley. And he didn't like Coca-Cola one bit. He was what we would think of today as sort of a Whole Foods advocate, an advocate for healthy living. And he had his agent seize a load of Coca-Cola syrup that was traveling from where they had blended it in Atlanta to a bottling plant in Chattanooga. And he claimed that the product was misbranded because it didn't get its stimulant effect. At that point, it's worth noting it was Coca-Cola was marketed as a stimulant. It didn't get that effect, from the Coca or the cola, as we've just discussed, but rather from the caffeine that was extracted from tea and blended into it. And this incident led to a court case that went on for, 7 years and went all the way to the Supreme Court, and eventually was settled because Coca-Cola claimed that they had changed their formula, and the original case no longer applied. Coca-Cola had to pay the court fees, and they got their 8-year-old cola syrup back. But I think the interesting thing about this case is that it set up the questions that are still being asked today, which is caffeine different if it's blended in powder form to a product such as Coca-Cola versus if we take it in coffee? Is it helpful for children to take it? Is it an addictive substance? And I think the biggest question that they asked, and really that remains unanswered to this day, is what role should the federal government play in regulating caffeine?
Right. Yeah. So right on that point, there's been in the recent decade, a huge rollout of energy drinks of different kinds that are basically all caffeine based. Is there any restriction on how much caffeine can be put in these drinks?
None. The FDA does not even have a regulatory standard, a regulatory definition of what an energy drink is. Not only do they not place any particular limit on the amount of caffeine you can put in an energy drink, they don't even require that bottlers list the quantity of caffeine that's contained in a product, either in, and that's true for soft drinks as well, but for soft drinks or energy drinks. Now, some bottlers have been voluntarily doing this, and it's worth noting that Coke, Pepsi, and Dr. Pepper Snapple, the three biggest soft drink bottlers, have voluntarily, been labeling their caffeine content for several years now. But you don't need to adhere to any specific caffeine limit if you're bottling an energy drink. Now, FDA was clear to tell me that if you make something that seems to be associated with a health problem, if you make a super powerful, super caffeinated energy drink and people are having health problems all of a sudden, they can require you to take it off the market. But in terms of just, having a standard that says, this is how much caffeine you can put in an energy drink, no, there's no such rule.
Yeah, I mean, to me, as a parent, there's a little bit of a red flag there because these look like soda. I mean, they're packaged like soda, and I'll venture to guess that most parents or adults in America probably don't know exactly what they might subject their kids to if they say, "Oh, sure, you can have that at checkout." So have you looked at that at all?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. They're not only packaged like soda, but they're racked right next to soda, and Monster and other bottlers want to suggest that they're not marketing to youth, but I think that young males clearly seem to be the target market of the advertising. I mean, if you look at the action sports, heavy metal music, bikini models, et cetera, that are used to promote these products, they seem to be appealing to young males. And it's worth noting for children, I mean, if you have an energy drink, say a 16-ounce Monster with 160 milligrams of caffeine, if you're smaller, that caffeine is going to have proportionally greater effect on you. So it is worth. I think the important thing here, the short way of saying this is, I think parents should be aware of how much caffeine is in any product that their children are consuming, and aware of the effect it has on their children if they consume it regularly.
Okay, so the listeners to this program are largely people who are trying to operate at their peak potential to do the right thing in all sorts of areas of life. So with this, let's talk about the positives that consuming any kind of caffeine product, what it can do as a benefit to living your life, and weigh that against any of the negatives that you've researched.
Yeah, so I think the positives are pretty well known. They're the reasons that most people do take caffeine daily. It makes you feel alert. It can even if you're not tired, it can buoy your mood. It just simply, I think the shortest way of saying it is it can make most people feel good. Now, beyond that, it can certainly help you it can increase your focus for a variety of sort of intellectual tasks, and these can be all across the board. Additionally, it helps you to maintain vigilance, and this is one of the reasons that the armed forces have done a lot of research on caffeine, because often soldiers have to serve when they're extremely tired and in situations that might be boring, but where any infrequent stimuli might be significant, maybe even life-threatening. And it's in those kinds of situations that caffeine might really be able to help. And I think the same holds true for, say, someone who's driving late at night. Of course, the best thing to do is stop and take a nap if you're tired. But if you can't, caffeine can help you in the short term to actually, improve your vigilance and concentration. So that's one big thing it does.
How about athletic performance?
Well, athletic performance is really amazing. Now, this is another area that I thought I knew a bit about. I used to race bicycles in college, and even back then, so this was 30 years ago, we knew that if you took a short, strong cup of coffee before a race, you'd get a little bit of a stimulant effect. But what I didn't realize is how significant that stimulant effect is, and how it really affects different parts of your body. And more research is showing how caffeine can benefit you in athletics. So if you or I were to, say, do a 1-hour foot or bicycle race and consume a moderate amount of caffeine before the race one day and none the other, we would probably improve our performance. For most people, you'd have an improved performance of between 1% and 3%, which is to say a 1% to 3% decrease in your time for that timed event. Mm-hmm. And that could be the winning margin in many races. So it's quite significant, and it has at least a couple of functions here. One is that it is decreasing your sense of fatigue, so allowing you to actually perform harder for longer. That's well known. I mean, that's sort of what we expect it to do as a stimulant. But another is that it actually enhances a calcium pump within our muscles, allowing our muscles, each contraction of the muscles, to contract slightly more forcefully. Now, not a huge amount, but it's significant. So there's a lot of exciting research going on now with caffeine and athletics, and it can provide a significant boost. It really is a performance-enhancing drug in that sense.
But totally legal as far as national sports are concerned, right?
Almost totally legal. The trend has been towards less regulation and not more, for the simple reason that the amount that will optimally enhance your performance also falls into the high end of the range that most of us are consuming daily. So, if you have a drug that most Americans are consuming daily at a level that would enhance your performance, it would really be tricky to, eliminate that. And there really doesn't seem to be a lot of benefit from, say, tripling up on your dose, which
right.
Would be something you could test for. But the NCAA, for example, does have a limit, a caffeine limit, the National Collegiate Athletic Association, and that's a urine. They test for it in a urine test. But again, I think for most coffee drinkers, you would be safe. You'd have to have a fair amount of caffeine to fail the test. But I think a lot of NCAA athletes are cautious because of that limit.
Okay. And what would you say about in corporate America or in the business environment? Again, having that alertness is probably going to help performance, keep you up during your workday. But there's probably a downside to it. So I'll just ask, for the average person who might consume it throughout the day, what are the suggestions that you'd have as far as getting the benefit without much of the negatives?
Right. So this is another really interesting issue you raise here. So if you use caffeine regularly, you develop a partial tolerance to it, and so the next the next cup of coffee you have, your regular coffee drinker, won't affect you as much as the first one that you ever had. So I think we can easily get to a point of using sort of more caffeine than you really need by sort of steadily ramping up. And so I think that's one thing to look out for is just to see if it's possible to moderate your caffeine consumption so that you're getting most of the benefit and not so much of the downside. Now, it's tricky to sort of prescribe any amount for anyone because, as we talked about earlier, it's the amount that's optimal for one person is not even going to sort of wake up the next guy. So I think it's really worth everybody experimenting and trying to understand, what's best for them. But if if you're always dragging and you can't get out of bed without caffeine, then maybe it's worth knocking it back a notch and see if that helps.
Okay. Earlier you mentioned that for people who have sleep difficulty, it might be a good idea to curtail the use of the coffee and see how it affects. Whether it's a positive change. Would it make any difference if I say switched from coffee to green tea? Would that be more healthy, or does that have just as much caffeine?
It has less. I mean, and overall, tea has far less. That's another really interesting issue. So this is a rough generalization, but the same size cup of tea versus the same size cup of coffee would probably have 3 or 4. The coffee would have 3 or 4 times, maybe even 5 times as much caffeine as the tea. So, tea is definitely a much more moderate caffeine dose. And so, yeah, for some people who if you're interested in moderating your caffeine use, using tea is one great way to try it. And, along these lines, for when people are trying to, moderate or kick the habit, it is worth, and the researchers mentioned this to me, it's worth tapering off, especially if you're a heavy coffee drinker, because most people will experience some fairly predictable, unpleasant withdrawal symptoms if you sort of go cold turkey. And I think the best known of this is the sort of caffeine withdrawal headache.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so the various different kinds of teas, they can have varying amounts of caffeine too. For instance, the typical Lipton black tea versus green tea. Any significant difference there?
Yeah, again, they can be variable, but generally you're going to have a little bit more caffeine, maybe 40, a strong soak of tea, one tea bag, maybe 45 to 50 milligrams with the Lipton black tea, maybe 55 milligrams, and probably closer to 20 to 30 or 35 with the green tea. So, yeah, the black tea is probably going to be stronger. And this is tangential, but I think it's worth noting that the ready-to-drink tea market, the bottled teas, have become very popular as well. And those, too, have, a moderate dose of caffeine.
They're adding caffeine?
No, it's just naturally occurring caffeine. But yeah, it's just another way that we're consuming caffeine regularly in our diet. The sort of tea as we know it, a bag, as we commonly think of it, a tea bag soaked in hot water, is not how most of our tea is consumed in this country. 85% of the tea we consume in the U.S. is consumed iced, and that's either in ready-to-drink in bottles or in large, vats that make the sweet tea and stuff in the South.
Okay, I'm speaking with Murray Carpenter about his book "Caffeinated: How Our Daily Habit Helps, Hurts, and Hooks Us." So as we approach the close, Murray, I'd like to ask: is there any area of the book that you'd like to address that I haven't, touched on with my questions?
No, I think the big thing that I'm hoping people will take away from this is I'm not trying to raise alarm about caffeine, but to raise awareness about it. I think it's a really fascinating drug. I think it deserves more respect, and I think we consistently underestimate the influence it plays on our lives, on commerce. We spend $140 billion a year retail on caffeinated products, and just our bodies. So I just think we consistently underestimate caffeine. I think it's a fascinating drug, and I think it deserves more understanding.
Well, I'll tell you that on a personal level, when I saw your book, I thought, wow, this is an area where, just like you said, having a little more of a background, a little more of an understanding will help a lot of people who are really kind of oblivious to it, because it's such an accepted beverage, enhancing compound.
Yeah, you're right, and you raise another interesting issue. It's societally accepted, not just in America, but all over the world. So, it's routine to consume tea in Asia. It's routine to consume yerba mate in parts of South America. Coffee almost worldwide. Kola nuts in Africa. So yeah, worldwide it's very much an acceptable chemical.
Yeah. Well, Murray, thanks for all the enlightening information. I appreciate it. The book is called Caffeinated: How Our Daily Habit Helps, Hurts, and Hooks Us, and you can find that on major booksellers, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, etc. So once again, Murray, thanks for joining me.
Well, thank you very much for your interest. I appreciate it.